Hey, you guys, I once heard an author, Donald Miller, talk about how he went up to a friend's cabin so he could write, so he could get some quiet space. And, Donald Miller, what you need to know about him is he's an avid infomercial watcher. And so am I, really. I really like infomercials. It comes from my film background. I think it's really interesting to see if they can make it work and if they can really sell it well and all that stuff. And so when he was up there, he had writer's block, and he started going through all the cupboards, and he noticed in one of the cupboards there was a magic bullet, and he got really excited, because this is maybe the king of infomercial stuff, right? So he decided he was going to go into town, and he totally skipped his responsibilities of writing, went into town, got all the ingredients to make perfect salsa, and put those all together inside this magic bullet, read the instructions, and you know how it's supposed to work, right? You tap it once, it chops. You tap it twice, it makes perfect salsa. You tap it 3 times, it makes ketchup. So he's just really, really excited, and he just taps it, ketchup, right? He's really frustrated. He must have done something wrong, and so he does it again. Cleans it out, reads the instructions, taps it, just barely taps it, ketchup. Does it again, ketchup. Boom, ketchup. Boom, ketchup. Boom, ketchup. And he was so frustrated because he had seen this commercial so many times, and all it could do was make ketchup. And here's why I bring that up. I believe there are times that we in Christianity do this. We make an infomercial out of things. Sometimes we do it with Jesus. We just package them in as small as we can, as tight as we can, and really treat them like an infomercial, and then people are let down. And sometimes we do it with other truths, biblical truths. And we refine everything down to these little tiny packages, and we kind of hope we can get one sermon here and one there, and we never think about them in between. And sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes it doesn't do it justice. Sometimes it needs unpacking. And I think this is one of those subjects. It isn't easy to raise G-rated kids in an X-rated world, a sexually and violently charged world. It isn't easy. And so we unpack this subject over time. And I think we should revisit it in the future too. It's critical to revisit it. It's critical to get ongoing help and support. It's tough. We're insufficient, but He is more than sufficient. Remember, that was the big idea last week. And I will not be reviewing much today at all. So if you haven't heard why we chose the 5 C's, so you have an outline in your bulletin. There's those 5 C's you see there. These are the backdrop of everything we're shooting for. There's a great explanation in the first week. If you go to our Facebook page, Facebook.com/Hillcrest Blue Valley, you can just scroll down the timeline until you see where they're posted. If you search on Facebook, Hillcrest Blue Valley, you'll get there. There's no other Hillcrest Blue Valley. So just look and you'll find those sermons, the last 2. And a lot of people have been downloading them, which is great. So please feel free to do that to get that information. They're critical. They're the end in mind for our youth that we always want to keep in mind throughout this series. And you'll notice we're starting at number 7 today. That's because we've covered 6 other things. Again, go to Facebook and listen to those. But I do want to say something about our theme verse, that little verse in Psalms 127:35. That children are a gift. That children are a reward. Why is that important to remember? I say it over and over again, but if they're not on your heart, they're on your nerves. It's really true. Funny, but true, right? Your ability to love and live out these actions is directly related to where your heart is. We covered that in Scripture last week. From an evil heart comes evil words. From a good heart comes good words. It takes prayer to say, God, work on my heart every day. God, work on my heart as we relate to these kids and young people in our world. I need to see them as the gift they are, or they'll just be on my nerves. Remember, I'm not saying I'm an expert. And I rely on a lot of people. I rely a lot on Doug Fields. And I've actually been communicating with him a little bit on Chap Clark. I just started reading another one of Chap's books called Hurt 2.0. It's a good book if you want to pick it up. I give other resources in the first sermon. You can pick those up by just listening to that. I can't go through that right now. And although there's a lot to absorb, and I have just been unloading a lot for you guys to absorb, this week I've decided to deliver 2 main points with a lot of stuff. Not so much as we did last time. Because I want us to be able to go a little slower, hopefully. And the plan is, barring no changes, we'll do 2 next week, and that'll be our 10. And then the following week, which is the 30th, the last week of Sunday of September, I'm just going to give one main key point that I think is critical. If you go after that one thing, I think you'll catch a lot of this. It'll be short, and then we'll share a meal together. And I'm hoping to have a couple surprises that involve us with kids and families and stuff, too. I'm working on that. So I'm really looking forward to that. It'll be a neat day. I've had some great conversations with you. Some of the dads have said, I really want to be a good dad. I hear that a lot. And that, I'm proud of that. I love hearing that. I want to build you up. And part of the reason I want to build you up is because in a little bit I'm going to tear you down. And ladies, if you're saying, why are you picking on the guys? This is a real bad generalization, and I don't like generalizations. But generally speaking, I suspect that women put more effort into parenting generally. Not all the time, but generally. I know that that's not the case, and we've seen the opposite at times. And sometimes they display a little bit better parenting skills. And so there's a couple things I'm going to hammer today that might be hammered a little bit towards men. But I think this is true in our house. Kathy, when we got married, she really surprised me. She was so good at it, at parenting. I just wasn't expecting that. And she was great. It's like if parenting was high school, she'd be the valedictorian and I would be the guy in the quad trying to burp the alphabet or something. It's like I have a lot to learn. And so I want you to know I think that about myself. There's a lot I'm learning in this process. I want to say something to grandparents, probably more than any other generation that lives in Johnson County. With the expenses and the two-income, all that stuff, grandparents have had to step up and dive in. They've just had to help out. And I think kids are going to call you blessed one day because of the incredible additional supplemental parenting that you've been doing. And that's an amazing thing. I want to read you real quickly just a letter from a third grader. They had to write on the subject, what is a grandma? I love this. It says, a grandmother is a lady who has no children of her own, so she likes other kids. A grandfather is a man grandmother. Grandmothers don't have to do anything except be there. They're so old they shouldn't play or run. It's just enough to drive us to the store that has the pretend horse and have lots of money ready. When they walk, they're slow, but they notice things like pretty leaves and caterpillars, and they never say, hurry up. And remember, I didn't write this. A third grader did. Usually they're fat, but not too fat to tie their shoes. They wear glasses and funny underwear, and they take their teeth out at night. They don't have to be smart, only answer questions like why dogs hate cats and how come God isn't married. When they read us, they never skip or don't mind if we want the same story over and over again. Everybody should try to have a grandma, especially if you don't have a TV, because grandmas are the only ones who have a lot of time. Grandparents, you are instrumental in the lives of your kids. I've heard some of you tell me you've gotten some stuff out of this just for you, and that was the point. Remember, these are relational things. You've gotten stuff out of the series because it's impacted you regardless of the kid part of it. But let me just say, for those kids that God has entrusted to all of us, and He's entrusted kids to all of us, everyone in this room He's entrusted kids to. In neighborhood schools and teams, whether you have your own kids or not, He's entrusted kids to you. And here's the thing, if we can help them realize they were the created handiwork of God, the masterpiece of God, a unique creation by Him, they won't be so tempted to be a carbon copy of the X-rated world we're dealing with. And that's what we're talking about here. And I've also said this, I'm not looking for the ideal parents at Hillcrest. I'm not looking for that. I've blown it so many times. I have a 15, a 13, and an 8-year-old. I've blown it. I'm not pretending that I'm the ideal parent, and I'm not pretending you are either. But we are raising the ideals. What we're saying is we're going after something big. And as we use the 5 C's that's on that piece of paper you have as an ideal that we go after, we've come up with these actions, these 10 actions that we're going to attempt to do to get to there, to get to the confidence we want in them, the character, the conviction, the compassion, the competence, all of that. I've been saying over the course of this series that I'll bring you those 10 actions, and that'll enhance your odds of getting there. And I'm going to say it one more time. It's not a guarantee. Great kids come from some horrible homes. Some great kids do. And some really rough kids come from great homes. It's no guarantee, but it will enhance your odds. So we're going to jump right in. This is part 3. We're going to go on to number 7. And so the 7th thing that I believe every kid needs from caring adults is affection. Emotionally healthy kids have this in common. They've been given proper affection, and they've been given lots of it. And from the time they were born, and really the time you were born, we have this thing that I call skin hunger. You know, we need touch. We need affection. And if that skin hunger is not fed in appropriate ways, here's what's going to happen. We will settle for inappropriate touch. And frequently that results in becoming emotionally distant from others. It's not uncommon for men to be accused of being emotionally distant, right? The emotional equivalent of like a brick, basically. But I've seen this in both men and women. The roles change, so I'm not going after these hardline roles. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. If you don't figure out how to emotionally get involved in the lives of your kids, you're robbing them of that affection they need, and they'll suffer damage. If you're an unaffectionate father, I'll give you a couple things that typically are said will happen. One is you'll produce boys who don't know how to express themselves emotionally, and two, you'll produce girls who figure out how to express themselves sexually. What I've observed is that promiscuous teenage girls almost always point back to an absence of a male role model or an unaffectionate father. And the father might be home, but the affection lights are out. Dad, if your son feels awkward about hugging you or telling you that he loves you, chances are you feel the same way. If your daughter doesn't get the proper affection that she desperately needs, I guarantee she will get it somewhere else or from someone else, and probably not in an appropriate way. And you know, a good starting point here is verbal. If you're like, man, I've got to work on... My dad is the most awkward hugger in the world. I just don't want him to. He's like... But he tries. But for some of us, we know that about us, right? We know it. And verbal is a great way to start being affectionate. It's similar to encouraging, but a little different. I just read online a dad writing to his son on his birthday on Facebook, and it said this: today is my son's golden birthday, on the 13th. Happy birthday, buddy. You're my best friend, my wingman, and the best son a guy could ever hope for. I'm so proud of you. Thanks for telling me you love me every day. I love you too. Now, that's a great example of a dad not holding back. Yes, is it better in person? Sure. Sure, it's better in person. But I have to say, you know, some people spend so much time in the protection mode as a parent. So much time making sure their kids can't access anything. And I get it. There's controls that need to be in place for the internet and Facebook and everything. I get it. But what a great example of how to use it to do something great, to express something positive, to reach out and say you care. And somehow, at some point, we have to start teaching and really preparing our kids beyond the other things. Hey, I understand there's a lot of us, probably even in this room, that have hurdles to affection. I understand. Maybe it wasn't modeled in your home. You grew up in a home where your parents had that, you know, affection bypass surgery, and it completely bypassed you. You know what I'm talking about. And let me say this, though. You're not children anymore. So you need to figure out how to break that affectionless cycle before it wounds the children that you have, just like it wounded our culture. And I realize there's a personality piece to this. I get it. You know, I've worked with many pastors and people in ministry that are the most affectionate people you have ever met. They go around hugging everybody. They'd hug a palm tree if a person wasn't available. You know, that's fantastic. It's awesome. That's really not me. That's not my personality. I happen to be a little more reserved. I'm not convinced that, you know, that total strangers want to be assaulted. You know, it's just who I am. I still shake my mom's hand occasionally. No, it's not that bad. But I'm just cautious. You know, I see these people walk up to a woman who's 9 months pregnant and a rubber belly, and I'm like, oh, that's just a little invasive to me. That's where I land. I mean, if an arm came out of her ribs, I might shake it, but probably not. That's really disgusting. Here's my point. We all have hurdles. But don't make your kids suffer or your grandkids suffer because of your personality or your past or your quirks. Figure it out. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm working on this with my kids, whatever it takes. Is it hugging, wrestling, rubbing their head, noogies? I don't know, whatever it takes. One of the reasons I like in my family to sit in front of the television and watch anything with my kids is that they tend to cuddle up at that time. And they kind of argue over who gets to sit next to dad. And, you know, I want them to have my affection, and it's just an easy way for me to do it, to wind down. Again, a little side note here. These 10 actions are just relationship skills. Remember, they work with any relationship. Marriage needs affection. And your kids need to see it, affection appropriately lived out. I'm just giving you relationship skills that are in the context of parenting. And you might remember that last week I talked about encouragement, that encouragement is communicating this, that I love you and believe in you regardless of performance. Affection takes it one notch further. It's showing it. Encouragement is saying I love you and I believe in you, and affection is showing that, because in our world, talk is cheap. Sometimes talk is totally insincere. Affection shows up. It shows up. 1 John 3:18 says this: Dear children, now you can't say any clearer than this. Let us stop saying we love each other. Let us show it by our actions. If you've been here during this series, you know that I don't like to just live in theory land, that we have to get kind of practical. And so I just give some suggestions, take them or leave them. But the first suggestion I would give that's in the practical realm, or practical way to think about it, is this: pour it on. Pour it on. They need affection, and they need it badly. But something happens when puberty hits. It gets all awkward. They get all awkward. They start acting strange. And then teenagers, we pull back, and teenagers say, see, you're weird, and you make me feel uncomfortable. And this vicious cycle starts to happen, right? So this distance develops, and that's when they need it the most. During adolescence, it's like everybody's pushed them away, and we need to be pouring it on. If you don't think it's true, you should go down and watch where teenagers are. Every Friday I put up the sign out there, or the banners. I put them up on Friday, take them down on Sunday. Can't have them up during the week. So on Friday at 5 o'clock, which was my time to go put it up, there's always kids waiting. They've been here for a sport, or they were here waiting for their parents now for some reason, and there was a whole group of boys this time out there. Watch what they're doing. They're hitting each other. They're slapping each other. I mean, they're doing all this crazy stuff. They're wrestling, smacking, jumping on each other. Why? Because they're awkward. And when nobody's giving them attention, they're getting affection for themselves in the way they know how. You know, I have a 13-year-old son. You all know him, basically. And he's not going to come up to me and say, Daddy, touch me. And, you know, affection, Dad. It's just not going to happen. And it's happening less that way right now as we speak. What does he do? He tries to jump on me, or he tries to figure it out, or we end up doing something a little more physical. I honestly believe pretty soon I'm going to be able to carry him around in a headlock and drag him around the room, and he'll think it's affection. It's like I don't know, it's like a Hallmark moment, and Rockwell should paint it or something. In the absence of the emotional vocabulary, remember we talked about this, kids don't really have the emotional vocabulary. So they'll say extreme things in short sentences or whatever. Remember, they're finding awkward ways to ask for affection they need. Jesus, I say this often, but Jesus really was the manliest of men. And I know we don't, whatever, right? He was manly in a certain way. Look he is rebellious. He went against the institution. He was really sacrilegious. He really did everything on the wrong days because the Father in heaven told him to. Heal someone on the Sabbath. It's craziness. Jesus would steer through a crowd and could part the crowd with a look. Jesus was definitely a tough guy. He took the ultimate grenade for us when he died on the cross. And yet, Jesus was incredibly compassionate and affectionate. And he's our ultimate example. And I'm going to run through a few verses really fast with you. And here they are. Matthew 8:3. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man, and the man he touched said, I am willing. And he said, be clean. And immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. Matthew 17:7. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said, don't be afraid. Matthew 20:34. Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. Mark 7:33, the weirdest one of all. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers in the man's ears, and then he spit and touched the man's tongue. Which I know it's weird, but the point is he didn't have to do any of that. Jesus didn't have to do it. He proved it in other places, but almost always he touched. Almost always he did. Especially it's weird when you talk about leprosy and how incredibly dangerous it was and how poorly viewed it was. You never touched a leper. It was not just physically unclean, it was spiritually seen as unclean, and Jesus did anyway. He did it anyway. He could have done the double magician whammy, right? You're healed. He could have just spoken it. He is the God of the universe. He could have done all that, but Jesus understood the critical importance of affection in the healing and the development of those he interacted with. To be a man or woman of God means I have to take note of that. To say I'm a follower of Jesus says, if I say I'm living like he is, it means I have to be affectionate. I'm not like him if I'm not. I mean, I'm driving the point home here because it's important. If you push those connections away, you push kids away. And the kids, if they don't get affection, they're going to seek it out in other ways, and our X-rated world has plenty of options. And we all know those are destructive, ultimately. Here's another practical thing that might not make sense to you when I first say it, but it makes sense. Hear me out. Fearlessly go after uncomfortable conversations with your kids. What does that have to do with affection? What does that have to do with it? By displaying a fearless resolve to be okay about talking about anything and everything with your kids, you open the gateway to doing the same with potentially awkward affection. They cross over. You in essence say we have no need for awkwardness in this home or in this place, no matter what kind. Every sensitive sexual topic or any other sensitive topic should be approached by you. If you're a parent, you should go after it fearlessly in a climate of nothing is uncomfortable. You're creating this climate. Nothing's uncomfortable to talk or express about here. I know. Believe me, I know it's frightening. I'm right there with you. It's frightening. But what are you willing to fight for when it comes to your kids? You might have to invent a godifier. Remember, we kind of made up that term last week. The modifier that God used on Gideon. Gideon, mighty warrior. And that's a godifier. A modifier can be negative, but a godifier never can. When God speaks it into your life, He says, this is who you are. You may not know it, but it's who you are. You may have to do one on yourself. You might have to use a godifier. Darren, fearless conversationalist. I might have to say, okay, I'm Darren, the fearless, awkward destroyer. You know, I might have to just tell myself this and go after it. And listen, when you get, I know I'm talking to a select group of parents, but when you get that memo about the sex film that's going to be shown in school, use that to your advantage. I'll just say, when that happened for Kevin, I took him in the car and went on a long drive, and he was strapped in and he couldn't go anywhere. And I said, hey, I heard you saw that movie. Was it a little weird? And he said, a little. His statements were short in response, let me tell you. Did that raise any questions? No. Okay. I said, great, well, just to be sure, and I literally said it this way, I'm laying it all on the line right here. I'm telling you everything I know. And I said it kind of funny, and he went, uh-oh. I swear. And I went through everything, and actually, I was coming home from the airport, and I was almost home, and I just kept driving. He doesn't know what street I'm on. I just kept going. And I went into everything, how all the parts work, how sexual addiction is a real problem, and that some of his friends that he knows today will inevitably be addicted sexually. That I can guarantee that. I told him why God has a better plan. And I went into some graphic stuff that I can't even believe I was saying. And you know what he said? He must have responded 5 or more times. I wondered about that. Now, that first short answer didn't have the emotional vocabulary to communicate with me. But this response told me that our schools will never make up for what we bring to the table, ever. Right? And I told him, I don't feel uncomfortable about this, but honestly, I was using a modifier. I was telling it to myself. And he said, either do I. And then I asked him, and we had a great time after that, because I said, did anybody in the class do something stupid? That's one of my favorite questions. Did anybody do anything stupid today? It's a great question, because then you get to find out what we all think is stupid. But in this case, it was about that specific class, and he told me these things that these kids did. I mean, they're embarrassed, they're just awkward, and we laughed about it. And I said, well, we don't need that here. There's nothing uncomfortable about it. This is how life works. And since that time, I've approached him about some stuff that's come up, uncomfortable things, and he was fine. And I actually feel empowered. I'm like, bring it on. I want some more of these conversations, but I'm not going to do it for you and your kids, so just get that down. And Kevin and I have this agreement. When something comes his way, and it most likely will, I don't say if, something's going to come his way. And we get dishonest with ourselves when we think we can make sure nothing will ever come their way. That is not thinking like a person who's getting prepared. I said, when something comes your way, it's not a big deal. Tell me about it, and we can figure it out. And he's like, all right. I mean, it's critical that we do this. Why is it under affection? Because we need to aggressively go after those things that are uncomfortable, no matter what they are. If you go after it, here's what they'll know. My parents don't put their discomfort ahead of me. And also, with the sex talk in particular, we have to dialogue in this thing about affection, about what is appropriate affection and what is not. We have to have a conversation. So there's this dual purpose in having those going after fearlessly. If you feel awkward about something, make it happen. Go after it. It's powerful. And this is why we have to have honest conversations in our church and in our youth group. I mean, appropriately handled for sure. But I want my kid, when he hears all the warped stuff out there, to go, I heard it. We talked about this at church. They deal with stuff honestly there. Really, your church does? Because it's a surprise, right? It shouldn't be. Everything, I believe, can it be explained to any kid at any age in an age-appropriate way. I'm not going to go into all those now. If you would like some examples, come up to me afterwards. We'll have a good laugh. Because you can. You can, any subject. Here's the deal. If your kid asks you a question A potentially embarrassing question, please attempt to answer with an appropriate, age-appropriate answer. Don't avoid it. And don't say, I don't want to talk about that now, and never come back to it, because when you do that, they learn not to go to the uncomfortable place with mom or dad. I better go to someone else. And they learn it quick. And that will transfer to their approach to affection. So here we go. Romans 12:10 says this, and some of us should probably memorize this. It really is a great verse. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. Kids need affection. Get past any and all awkwardness and show affection and have the hard conversations. And do it even if you still feel awkward. And listen, you may know an awkward moment is coming and you're not sure you have the power to do it. Call me up. I will Godify you. I'll go, yes, you do. Just do it, and I'll hold you accountable. Or get in a small group. Small groups are great for this, an intersection group, and say, I can see a conversation come in, and let them keep you accountable, and let them pour into you life, and give wisdom from their own experience. Go after it. Don't back off. It's a biggie. It's a big deal. And another biggie, the second one, and maybe the biggest one, and one that I get really intense about, if you thought I was intense on that one, it's this one. They need responsibility. Kids need to develop responsibility. If they don't develop responsibility, here's what won't happen. They will not have confidence, character, conviction, compassion, and competence. Without responsibility, it's not possible. And you know, I've told many of you I was a college pastor for 6 years, and having worked in that age group, especially the younger teenagers coming in that are supposed to be kind of prepared for the world, I can tell you where I see a lack of responsibility the most. It shows up in 3 primary ways. I'll make it easy to remember ABC. The first way is apathy. I don't care about being responsible. The second way is blame. I don't have to take responsibility because it's never my fault. It's always his fault, right? And the third one, C, is care for me mentality. I've been cradled my entire life. If someone else figure this out. What do you think today's generation of kid is going to tell their kids about the hardships of growing up? You know, I remember my grandmother. She would tell me about the Depression. We've all heard parents say crazy things like, you know, I had to walk to school uphill both ways barefoot in the snow after I milked the cows, right? But the equivalent today in our culture could be something like, oh, life's so tough. One time my parents made me oversee the house cleaner. And I was hungry, and whenever I was hungry, I actually had to go to the kitchen and speak directly to the dietitian. I mean, it's just completely not the same. And how do we, parents or significant adults, with the kids that are entrusted to us, help kids become more about blame and apathy and the care for me mentality? Because we do. Here's some examples. Apathy. What do we do as parents? We solve all their problems. Always picking up for them, not making them do anything. We make money too easy to get and not valuable enough. We teach kids they don't really need to do much nor care. That's apathy. What about blame? Why do kids always blame? I think I keep using sports analogies because we see it all the time. I see it in sports a lot. You know, and this is a real analogy. A referee stopped a soccer game because a girl had jewelry on. She was 16 years old, and you're not supposed to have jewelry on when you're playing out there. And as the coach was reprimanding her, because everybody knew this rule, what did she do? She said it's the referee's fault. He was supposed to check before the game. Perfect. Right? Not owning anything. Or when we say, sweetheart, you got a bad grade in your class because your teacher doesn't know anything. You know, or son, you're not getting to play on the team all the time. It's not your fault. You're better than every other kid on the team. Okay, denial, something in there. Your coach is lame. You know, or your ears, they're not big. Kids just call you Dumbo because they like Disneyland. Bad example, but it's that kind of stuff. Whatever it is, we're always cushioning it for them. We're always taking it away. So what about the care for me mentality? It happens when we as parents never force our kids to carry their own weight. This is the big one for me. What happens is they haven't moved from infantile dependence to healthy independence. And they need to carry their own weight. And sometimes someone who wants to combat this idea will throw out a Christian-y verse like Galatians 6, and I'll show it to you on here, 6:2. Carry each other's burdens. What about this? And this will now fulfill the law of Christ. And the problem with that is you're taking it completely out of context, and you're skipping the very couple verses over, verse 5, that says, for each one should carry their own load. You know, old text used to say the same words there, and everyone would get confused. They'd say, what's going on? Is there flip-flopping going on here? Or we carry it or we don't? 2 different words. 2 different Greek words. In the first case, the boulder is described for a burden. An enormous boulder that the family of God has to carry for someone who can't carry it themselves. Something Crazy. Crazy big. And in the second place, the Greek word for load would best be described by a backpack. There are times when we have enormous boulders that we can make. We can't make it through our life without others, but we're all responsible to carry our own pack, our own load of responsibilities. Learning to be responsible and carrying our own weight is part of being a responsible human being. And it's not the end, by the way. If I was going to put it on a timeline, I would put it this way. We're dependent. We can't change our diapers. Someone has to feed us. Hopefully we're moving our kids to independence, right? We have to teach them how to drive. It's a scary thing. We have to do all these different things with money. We're teaching them to be independent. But the next step is hopefully interdependence. I've heard many couples that have fallen apart because they said, I just needed my independence. No, you need to get to interdependence. Independence wasn't the final stop. And I know there's lots of other reasons for marriages not to work. I'm saying that shouldn't be one of them. And then you get to dependence on me, where some people are totally dependent on you. Let me give you examples. Marriage is about interdependence. When you have kids, it becomes about the cycle is complete. Right? They are totally dependent on you. It's frightening when you're a new parent. Kathy and I drove with Megan in the back seat from the hospital. We kept looking at, going, what do we do now? Frightening. Totally dependent on us. I thought for sure she wasn't going to make it a week. But if we don't help them now become independent, it is impossible to reach all those other stages. They will never be prepared for life. They're unprepared for life. And here's a practical write-down. Allow consequences. What if they forget their cleats to the baseball game? They miss the game. And in the scope of life, that's not the biggest deal. Chances are it won't happen again. Didn't do their homework, they pay the consequences. And if it really is too much, the homework is too hard, help them get the help they need. Bailing them out just avoids inevitable consequences and important conversations that they need to have. But when we bail them out over and time again, they never take any responsibility for themselves. They never experience any life-developing consequences. It's critical. I could sum it up in a letter that went around years ago in California, and it went to all these youth leaders. And it was someone who wanted them to read it to their youth group. Listen to this letter. It says, Dear Pastor, we are members of a youth group a lot like yours. We meet every week for Bible study and fun. We're writing to tell you about one of our friends named Tessie who needs our help and yours. Tessie is a member of our youth group. She's on the cross-country team at school in the choir and a good student. She's very well-liked. And at this point, I'm thinking, okay, what is the big bummer? There's a tragedy. There's a calamity. It's cancer. She's lost a leg. You know, I'm thinking, oh, no, her dad shipped off to war. Something's happened here. But then they go on to say this. However, Tessie made a mistake last month. Tessie took her parents' car without permission and got into a wreck. She's okay, but it will cost $2,500 to repair the car. Tessie has her permit, but not her driver's license, so the insurance won't pay the damage. Tessie feels really bad because she's never done anything like this before, but her parents are making her pay for the whole thing, those awful parents. Now she has to quit sports and get a job. She's probably won't be able to go on the choir tour this summer. Even when she finds a job, it'll take forever to pay off the money. Please help us help her. We're writing every youth group we can to think of asking two things. One, write Tessie a letter even though you don't know her and tell her how you feel bad for her. Two, could you take up a little collection to help Tessie pay her debt? If each student in your group could give 50 cents or $1, it would help pay for the car and help Tessie feel better about herself. We're not asking each youth group to do a lot. We're asking each group to do a little. Wouldn't you want someone to do this for you if it happened to you? So let me get this straight, right? Tessie steals her parents' car, she crashes it, and now she wants me to pay for it. Yeah, I would love to write a letter. I'm serious. This is bad stuff. Dear Tessie, welcome to life. You have incredible parents. I'd like to meet them someday. It's very rare to find parents that actually follow through on making their kids pay the consequences for a stupid decision. It's great that you have friends. I just hope they never show up to my youth group or something like that. Right? Proverbs 27:12 says this. A prudent person foresees. Foresight is learned, by the way. A prudent person foresees the danger ahead and takes precautions. The simpleton, and I would circle simpleton, goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. Listen, when we don't allow our kids to experience fair and natural consequences, they will remain a simpleton forever. They will never develop a sense of responsibility. Some parents, you're contributing to their lack of responsibility. Some of the nicest, kindest, most wonderful people ever. Heart of gold. You say things like, I'll help them this once. I know I probably shouldn't. But you know, there are going to be plenty of years for them to do it on their own. They just can't help it. And my fear right now is if I go easy on us, we won't get it. So let me be straightforward. If this describes you, you're crippling your kids. You're crippling them. They will never be adequately prepared for the realities and difficulties of life. Remember, I keep saying our primary role is preparation, not protection or rescue. Those are important and they have their place. But our primary role is to prepare. If you've never prepared and protected them and hid them from everything, you locked them in a closet and then you let them out when they're in college, you ruin them. They are unprepared. And if you continue on that road, they're not going to be able to help others like you do. They'll always be takers and not givers. I have a friend named Jason, not just Jason, I want to be clear. The hardest thing for my friend Jason about turning his life around from his addiction to meth was not the drugs. He was on meth for so long, he didn't develop basic responsibility skills that we have. So it would be things like balancing the checkbook would send him over the edge of stress. It just was, these are too much to take all this stuff on, a checkbook. And you know what? It was much easier to go back to a drug that made him forget his responsibilities than to learn to be responsible. Do not be an adult that is basically a responsibility-avoiding drug to kids. That's what we're talking about here. You know, quick example, you see this in the 1, 2, 3 thing with little kids. When you say you count to 3. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's fine. I just want you to end on 3. Right? You say things like, don't make me count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Did you hear me? Maybe you're not hearing me. 1, 2, 3. You know, I'm serious now. You do not want to see the cyclone of fury that's inside of me. 1, 1.5. Right? Now we're into fractions, and the kid is just laughing. Please allow them to experience the value of the number 3, you know? Because if you don't do that when they're little. When they get to high school, it's whatever, it's different. Maybe you put a good boundary in place. They're on restriction, but then the parents keep backing down. Well, you can go to Kelly's birthday party. You're only 16 once. Or, you know, it is the end of the season. You should go to that last football game. You ought to go to that. You know, you've been on restriction for 2 days. You've learned your lesson, haven't you? No. What they've learned is their parents cave in. That mom and dad cave in. That there aren't consequences. That they definitely don't learn the lesson of this one, the consequences of being irresponsible. And it's a big one. And I hope we get this one. I'll give you a practical thought real quick here. Another one, money. Money is a quick way to begin to work on this. And you have to work on it in your own life too. It's hard. Money is a quick way. It's a great place to start. I worked for a woman named Mary Hunt. She's basically a female Dave Ramsey, right? She writes the Cheapskate Monthly and these debt-proof living and all this stuff. And she used to talk to me about debt-proofing my kids. And it always stuck because she developed this strategy that when her kids got to 6th grade, she was going to give them all the money they needed for a month. Not for everything at that age, but for all their birthday presents, for all their Chuck E. Cheese video game coins, whatever it was. They got that. When they graduated and they got into 6th grade, they graduated into this plan. So they initiated this crazy plan. And what did Jeremy, my friend Jeremy, do? Jeremy blew it all in one day. And he didn't have it for the rest of the month. And it killed them. And his little brother, who wasn't in 6th grade yet, was watching the whole thing. And the next month he got better, and the next month he got better, and he got prudent with what he spent. And one time he went to go buy a birthday present, and he took his mom to the plastic toy aisle in the grocery store. And he said, this is it. It's a $2 thing. And she was horrified. All these parents were out buying their kids these gigantic presents so that they didn't look bad. And he was saying, this is the one. I'm telling you, this is the present. And she let him do it, and guess what? He didn't play with any other toy, that boy. He only played with the one that Jeremy bought. Somehow he knew, and it was about us, right, when we have to buy the big present. Jeremy, I went to film school with, and Jeremy graduated. He was 22, and he bought his own house in California. His brother paid cash for his first brand new car, cash. They learned how to save. They put 10, they tithed 10, they saved 10, they did that, they did the whole thing. They lived on 80, and they just gave them more and more until they were buying all their own clothes, they were taking care of all their monthly expenses, more and more and more responsibility. And it paid off. It paid off. You know, there's a book called Debt Proofing Your Kids by Mary. Get it if you want to do that. But it starts with you. If you're a financial mess, you've got to figure that out, because not only are you ruining your future, but you're teaching your kids this stuff too. It's terrible. The next Dave Ramsey thing that comes, we did it. Kathy and I did it, and they asked us to be on TV. We're like, oh, Lord, no. But you know what? We did it. We talked with Dave Ramsey on Channel 4 or something. And you know what? That whole thing was great for us. And if you're interested in that, write it on your card and just say you're interested. And if we have enough, we'll do a debt-proof living thing here. So that is a practical thing. Our kids desperately need us to help them be responsible, and they need our affection. They desperately need those. And next week, I'm going to talk about the last 2 principles, and I'm excited about those in the following week. And I just want to say this. Parents, adults, all of us entrusted with kids, which is all of us. Let me say something. I've been a better parent, I think, over the last couple of weeks. Why? Because I'm so fearful of me getting up here and saying things in front of you. I have to prepare for this material. I'm not always a good parent. I need a lot of help. I've got a long way to go. The series is not so much about making you feel guilty. It's about what God is doing in your life, and it's never too late to start, even if your kids are grown up and out of the house. You can encourage them. You can write them. You can do all sorts of things with them. You can not bail them out, your adult kids, all the time. I've seen a lot of that. You know, it kind of hit me a long time ago, this whole thing about those of us without kids. I want to say something to you when you don't have kids. And it started as I was a college pastor, and I noticed that there were some students in my group that I felt like, that God had entrusted to me, that I felt a sense of being their older brother, or that they were like one of my kids. I just felt that. And you know, there's a couple girls like that in the group and a couple of guys. And part of it was my sisters were always hammering away what a good girl was and what a bad girl was. And that there was hidden gems that you couldn't see. And they were constantly saying that. And there was a couple girls in there, one named Charisse and Rebecca. Great quality girls. And the dumb guys in that group, and we had a large college group, they couldn't see it. And I would frequently tell the guys they were idiots. And I would frequently tell those girls that they were special and that God had something in store for them. They were going to meet a great guy, but that wasn't even the point. It was like they were a gem. They were a hidden jewel. And they were like, I would say, I treat you like my younger sister, and I'd look out for them. And you know, years went by, and we ended up leaving that church after 12 years of ministry. It was a great experience. I grew up in that church, so they had a reception, this huge line. And Charisse and her now fiance waited in this terribly long line and got up to us. And Charisse said to me, I remember when you said that to me. It was way back. Remember when you said that to me? And she cried. And in that whole long line of people, she could care less. And I turned to the guy, his name's Brian, and I said, Brian, I think it's Brian. I said, Brian, you are a genius. And I said, if you ever hurt her, I will kill you. Something like that. And I just connected on Facebook, and they have kids. And Rebecca was a similar story, same thing, just a gem. You know, there was a young guy in that group named Steve Miller. Another story, just a young guy. And I said one day to Steve, I said, Steve, you need to leave our college group. He was really hurt. And I said, no, you don't understand. You'll never be the leader God has created you to be. I can see you're a leader, but none of your friends let you out of their box. Your friends are going nowhere. You need to get out of here so you can be that leader. And I really don't want you to go, because he was my best student in that group. And I hoped he didn't listen to me. And 6 months later at Urbana, we took like 40 students, and Urbana's coming up again here. That Urbana conference, he announced to our group, Darren and I have been talking. I said this one time, you know, and I'm going to be going away to school. And I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I never said it. And he went away to school, and he would come back in 6 months. And he said, man, my friends haven't changed one bit. I go, yeah, they're all doing the same stupid things they were before you left. I go, you've been growing. I could see it. And then he went back to school, and then he came back, and he had met a girl, and they ended up getting married. And what do you think I said to him? I said, if it wasn't for me, right, you would never have met her. This is a wonderful girl. Now they have kids. When they had their kids, what did I say? If it wasn't for me. So I'm not too proud to admit that I did that. If it wasn't for me, it wouldn't have happened. And we laugh about it now, but it's I didn't have kids at the time. And here's the point. Do not tell me that you don't have influence on someone else's kids. That offends me. Don't validate my experience. That is a bunch of junk. It's just absolutely not true. You have a role to play with this generation, with our kids, whatever age we're talking about. So we need to be affectionate people that inspire and encourage and that teach responsibility. And I know it's not easy. Is it easy? No. Life in general is not easy. Remember, Scripture tells us, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. I'm insufficient to do this, but He is more than sufficient when I'm weak. You know, the time with your kids, the kids God's entrusted to you, in your neighborhood, whatever it is, in your home, is going to go by fast. If you're a parent, it's going to go by fast. Please just take 1 point each time. I give you all this junk. Just take one thing and try to put it into play. If you could do that, that would be great. Let's pray. God, this is our prayer. Our prayer is that this time that's going to go by fast would go by well. We know that we can't do any of what we've really discussed and we're talking about without your power. So now, Lord, we ask for your power that's greater than our own. And we thank you that when we mess up, it doesn't remove your love from us. So many of us have messed up, but we look forward, God. We look forward to next week as we do the possible, and we have faith that you're going to do the impossible. We believe it. And that you'll use us to care for and guide and lead those that you've entrusted to our care. God, like Scripture says, we beg you. We beg you for your help. We pray this in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen.